They say a single secret can change a life, but nobody tells you what happens when that secret starts changing your heart. The night I met Ethan Sterling, the rain was falling so hard it blurred the highway into streaks of silver and gold. My windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the storm as I drove along Interstate 87 just after midnight. Most people were home asleep. I should have been too. Instead, I was heading back from a late shift, exhausted, running on gas station coffee and stubborn determination. The storm had swallowed the road. Visibility couldn't have been more than 20 feet ahead. Every passing headlight looked like a ghost drifting through the darkness. Then I saw it. A black SUV sitting at an angle on the shoulder. One of its hazard lights blinked weakly through the rain. I almost kept driving. In weather like that, stopping for strangers wasn't exactly smart. But something about the vehicle made me slow down. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe fate. I pulled over nearly 50 yards ahead and sat there gripping the steering wheel. My heart told me to leave. My conscience refused. With a frustrated sigh, I grabbed my jacket and stepped into the storm. Rain soaked through my clothes within seconds. Cold wind whipped my hair across my face as I made my way toward the SUV. The driver's side door was partially open. That's when I saw him. A man slumped against the seat, motionless. For one terrifying second, I thought the worst. Then I noticed his chest rise. Relief rushed through me. "Hey," I called out. "Can you hear me?" No response. I moved closer. Even in the darkness, I could tell he wasn't an ordinary traveler. Everything about him looked expensive. His watch, his tailored coat, the vehicle itself. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the deep cut above his eyebrow, where he'd apparently hit something during the accident. Rainwater mixed with blood, washing harmlessly down the side of his face. He looked unconscious, not seriously injured, but vulnerable in a way powerful men rarely do. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. While waiting for emergency services, I found a small first aid kit inside the SUV and carefully pressed gauze against the cut. His eyes opened suddenly. Ice blue, sharp even through the haze. For a brief second, they locked onto mine. Confused. Searching. "Human. You're okay," I whispered. "Help is coming." He tried to speak, but couldn't find the words. His gaze never left my face. Something about that look made my chest tighten. Not fear. Not attraction. Something stranger. Like standing at the edge of a moment I didn't yet understand. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. The sound grew closer with every passing second. Relief washed through me. He was going to be fine. I stood to leave before the paramedics arrived. I don't know why. Maybe because disappearing felt easier than explaining who I was. Maybe because some part of me already knew our story wasn't supposed to begin that night. As I stepped away, his hand caught my wrist. Weak. Barely there. But enough. I looked down. Rain dripped from both of us. His eyes met mine again. This time there was recognition in them. Or maybe a promise. Then his grip loosened. I slipped free and walked back into the storm. By the time the ambulance reached him, I was gone. And I had no idea that 1 year later, the billionaire whose life I helped save would look into my eyes again and realize I was the woman he had never forgotten. Some people leave a mark on your life without ever learning your name. 1 year passed. 365 days of ordinary mornings, overdue bills, crowded buses, and long shifts that blended together like pages in a book nobody wanted to read. The night on the highway became something I rarely talked about. A strange memory tucked away in the corner of my mind. Sometimes I wondered what happened to the man in the black SUV. Sometimes I remembered those ice blue eyes staring at me through the rain. But life has a way of demanding your attention. Rent was due every month, whether you were busy remembering strangers or not. By the following spring, I found myself standing in front of the largest house I had ever seen. Calling it a house felt ridiculous. The Sterling estate looked more like a private resort hidden behind iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges. The stone mansion stretched across acres of land, surrounded by gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. My new employer had warned me the place was impressive. She had not done it justice. I tightened my grip on my small bag and followed the house manager through the front entrance. Marble floors reflected sunlight pouring through enormous windows. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. Everything smelled faintly of fresh flowers and expensive polish. "Remember the rules," Mrs. Caldwell said without slowing down. "Professionalism at all times. The staff quarters are on the east wing. The library is private. The office is private. Mr. Sterling values discretion. I nodded quickly. Understood. Good. Her expression softened slightly. People tend to stay here a long time if they respect boundaries. The orientation lasted less than an hour. By noon, I was already working. The job itself was simple enough. Dusting, organizing, making sure rooms that looked untouched still appeared perfect. Wealth had always fascinated me that way. The richer people became, the less they seemed to use half the things they owned. I spent most of the afternoon learning the layout of the estate. It was nearly 6 o'clock when everything changed. I was arranging fresh flowers in a sitting room overlooking the gardens when I heard footsteps behind me. Not loud, not hurried, just deliberate. The kind of footsteps that immediately command attention. I turned around. The vase nearly slipped from my hands. Ethan Sterling stood in the doorway. For a second, neither of us moved. My heart stopped. 1 year disappeared instantly. The rain, the highway, the flashing ambulance lights. It all came rushing back. He looked different now. Stronger, healthier, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. But the eyes were the same. Those impossible blue eyes. Recognition flashed across his face before he could hide it. A brief crack in an otherwise controlled expression. "Have we met before?" he asked quietly. My pulse thundered in my ears. This was the moment I had never expected. The moment I had secretly feared. I forced myself to smile. "I do not think so, sir." His gaze lingered, studying me, searching for something interesting. The single word hung in the air between us. Then his attention drifted toward the flowers in my hands. "Those are lilies." "Yes." My mother loved lilies. Something changed in his voice when he said it. Not sadness exactly. Something deeper. Before I could respond, he nodded once and turned away. The encounter lasted less than a minute. Yet after he left, I stood frozen beside the window for nearly 10 more. Because Ethan Sterling might have accepted my answer. But I had seen the look in his eyes. He remembered something. Maybe not my face. Maybe not my name. But somewhere deep inside, he remembered the woman who disappeared into the storm. And what terrified me most was that I was not the only one hiding a secret. The hardest lies are not the ones you tell other people. They are the ones you repeat to yourself until they start sounding like the truth. For the next few days, I avoided Ethan Sterling whenever possible. The estate was large enough to make that easier than it should have been. If I heard he was working in his office, I cleaned the West Wing. If he was meeting investors in the library, I volunteered to help in the guest suites. It felt ridiculous. I was a grown woman hiding from a conversation that had never actually happened. Yet every time I remembered the way he had looked at me, my stomach tightened. He had not believed me. I knew it. The problem was that I was not sure I believed myself anymore. On Thursday evening, a spring storm rolled across the property. Not nearly as fierce as the one from a year ago, but enough to darken the sky and rattle the tall windows. I was polishing silver in one of the dining rooms when the power flickered. Once, twice. Then everything settled. A few minutes later, Mrs. Caldwell appeared in the doorway. "Grace, Mr. Sterling needs the files from the study delivered to the library." My heart sank. Of course. She handed me a stack of folders. Immediately, the walk to the library felt longer than usual. Rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling overhead. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. When I reached the library doors, I paused for a second before knocking. "Come in." Ethan's voice carried through the room. Low, calm, controlled. I stepped inside. The library was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched upward beneath warm golden lights. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace despite the season. Ethan stood beside a long table covered with documents. He looked up when I entered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "The files you requested," I said. "Thank you." I placed them on the table and turned to leave. "Grace." My name stopped me. Slowly, I looked back. He was watching me again. Not as an employer studies an employee. More like someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Have you ever been to Albany?" he asked. The question hit me like ice water. My pulse jumped. "Why?" A faint smile touched his lips. "That is not an answer." I forced myself to remain calm. "I have traveled through a lot of places." His gaze sharpened. "Interesting." Silence settled between us. The fire popped softly behind him. Rain whispered against the windows. Then Ethan opened a drawer and removed a photograph. He placed it on the table. My breath caught. It was a security image taken from a highway service station. Grainy, blurry, but recognizable. A woman standing beside a coffee machine 1 year earlier. Me. I hired an investigator, he said quietly. I wanted to find the person who disappeared before I could thank her. The room suddenly felt smaller. You should not have done that. Perhaps. His voice softened. But some debts matter. I looked away first. The photograph seemed to burn against the polished wood between us. Every instinct told me to deny it again. To walk away. To keep the walls standing. Yet something in Ethan's expression stopped me. There was no anger there. No suspicion. Just certainty. Why did you leave? He asked. The question lingered in the warm air. I opened my mouth. Then closed it again. Because the truth was dangerous. Because my real name was not Grace Parker. Because if Ethan Sterling ever learned who I truly was, everything would change. And deep down, I was beginning to fear that change had already started. The truth sat between us like a locked door neither of us knew how to open. I stared at the photograph while rain traced faint lines down the library windows. Ethan waited. He did not push. He did not demand answers. Somehow that made everything harder. People leave for different reasons, I finally said. My voice sounded distant even to me. Sometimes staying is not an option. His eyes never left my face. And was that your reason? I forced a small smile. You ask a lot of questions for someone who already hired an investigator. A faint laugh escaped him. It was the first time I had heard it. Quiet. Unexpected. Human. Fair point. He slid the photograph back into the drawer. Relief washed through me so quickly it almost made me dizzy. The conversation was over. At least for now. I turned toward the door again. Grace. I stopped. Thank you. 3 simple words. Yet they landed harder than any question. I looked back. Ethan's expression had softened. I never got the chance to say it before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I nodded and left the library before he could see how much those words affected me. The following morning, the estate woke early. Delivery trucks rolled through the gates. Staff moved through hallways carrying flowers, decorations, and catering supplies. A charity fundraiser was being held at the mansion that weekend, and everyone seemed to be operating at double speed. By noon, the place looked transformed. White tents stretched across the gardens. String lights hung from ancient oak trees. Fresh roses filled nearly every room. I spent most of the day helping prepare guest areas. The work kept my hands busy but did nothing to quiet my thoughts. Every time I remembered Ethan thanking me, something uncomfortable stirred inside my chest. Dangerous feelings always begin quietly. Late that afternoon, I carried a box of centerpieces across the courtyard. The sky was bright blue for the first time all week. Birds drifted above the gardens. Everything felt peaceful. Then I heard voices. 2 men stood near the fountain speaking in low tones. One of them wore an expensive suit. The other held a tablet filled with financial reports. I would have walked past without noticing except for one sentence. Sterling still has no idea. I slowed instinctively. Good, the second man replied. Keep it that way until Monday. My pulse quickened. The men noticed me immediately. Their conversation stopped. Both turned toward me. I lowered my eyes and continued walking as if I had heard nothing. Yet the silence that followed felt heavy. Deliberate. Wrong. The moment I reached the service entrance, I glanced back. The 2 men were watching me. That night sleep refused to come. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my small room in the east wing. Wind brushed softly against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed midnight. My mind replayed the conversation again and again. Sterling still has no idea. About what? The question followed me into the next morning. By breakfast, the estate buzzed with anticipation for the fundraiser. Guests would begin arriving within hours. As I carried fresh linens through the main hallway, Ethan appeared at the top of the staircase. Our eyes met briefly. Something in his expression changed. Concern. Calculation. Almost warning. Then his phone rang. He answered immediately. Whatever he heard drained the color from his face. For the first time since I had met him, Ethan Sterling looked genuinely troubled. And somehow I knew the secret he was about to uncover was connected to the one I had spent years trying to hide. Secrets rarely arrive alone. They travel in pairs, carrying consequences behind them. The fundraiser began at 6 o'clock sharp. Luxury cars rolled through the gates one after another. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant dresses filled the estate with laughter, conversation, and the constant hum of money changing hands beneath polite smiles. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Inside, I could feel tension building like pressure before a storm. Ethan spent most of the evening moving from group to group. He smiled when required. He shook hands. He posed for photographs. Yet every time I saw him, his attention seemed divided. Whatever he had heard during that phone call earlier had not left his mind. Around 8 o'clock, I was carrying a tray of sparkling water through the garden reception area when I noticed the same two men from the fountain. They stood near the edge of the property, speaking quietly. One of them glanced toward Ethan several times. The other appeared nervous. My instincts immediately returned. Something was wrong. I should have ignored it. Employees who wanted to keep their jobs usually ignored things. But curiosity has always been stronger than common sense in my life. As I passed nearby, I caught another fragment of conversation. If the documents surface, everything changes. The second man looked uneasy. He cannot find out tonight. My pulse quickened. Documents. Surface. Everything changes. The pieces refused to fit together, yet the picture growing in my mind felt increasingly dangerous. Before I could hear more, one of the guests approached asking for assistance. By the time I looked back, both men had disappeared into the crowd. The rest of the evening moved quickly. Guests wandered through the gardens beneath thousands of lights. A live orchestra played softly near the terrace. Donations exceeded every expectation. Everyone seemed pleased except Ethan. Shortly after 9, a sudden breeze swept across the property. Several guests glanced upward as dark clouds gathered unexpectedly over the estate. The weather forecast had promised clear skies. Nature apparently had other plans. I was collecting empty glasses near the west patio when I noticed Ethan standing alone near the edge of the garden. For the first time all evening, nobody surrounded him. He stared toward the distant tree line, lost in thought. Something compelled me to approach. Maybe concern. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something far more dangerous. Mr. Sterling? He looked up immediately. The tension in his expression eased slightly when he saw me. Grace. His voice sounded tired. Are you all right? The question escaped before I could stop it. Ethan studied me for a moment. Then he surprised me by answering honestly. I am not sure. A strange silence settled between us. Honest. Vulnerable. Human. The version of Ethan nobody else seemed allowed to see. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Every trace of warmth vanished. Excuse me. He stepped away and answered immediately. I could not hear the entire conversation. Only a few words carried through the wind. Where? Pause. When was this discovered? Another pause. Then silence. Ethan's face turned pale. The call ended. He stood perfectly still. The world around us continued laughing and celebrating. Yet something fundamental had shifted. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward me. Grace, he said quietly, I need to ask you something. My heart stopped. Because in that moment, I realized whatever had been discovered tonight was somehow connected to me. And I was no longer certain my carefully built lies were strong enough to survive what came next. The moment before the truth arrives always feels strangely quiet. The music from the fundraiser drifted across the garden behind us. Guests laughed beneath strings of glowing lights. Glasses clinked. Conversations flowed. Yet standing there beside Ethan Sterling, I felt completely disconnected from all of it. What do you need to ask me? I managed. Ethan held my gaze for several seconds. His expression was unreadable. How long have you been using the name Grace Parker? Every sound around me seemed to disappear. My heart stumbled, then raced. For one terrifying moment, I forgot how to breathe. I forced myself to remain calm. What kind of question is that? His jaw tightened. A simple one. The wind shifted between us. Somewhere behind the mansion, thunder rolled softly across the horizon. The storm that had threatened all evening was finally arriving. I crossed my arms. I have used this name for years. Ethan studied me carefully. That is not what I asked. The words landed harder than they should have. Because technically he was right. I had answered without answering. Before either of us could continue, footsteps approached. A tall man in a navy suit hurried across the patio, carrying a folder. Ethan immediately recognized him. Not now, Ethan said quietly. The man hesitated. Sir, it cannot wait. He handed over the folder. Ethan opened it. As he scanned the contents, the color slowly drained from his face again. Whatever he was reading confirmed something he desperately hoped was not true. He closed the folder. Slowly, deliberately, then looked directly at me. Not with suspicion, not with anger, with disbelief. Who are you? The question cut deeper than I expected, because I no longer knew the answer myself. Grace Parker had become real over the past 3 years. The job applications, the apartment leases, the paychecks, the daily routines. Yet none of those things existed before. Before everything changed. Before I became someone else. Lightning flashed across the darkening sky. For a brief second, the entire estate glowed silver. I looked away first. You should be with your guests. Ethan took one step closer. Not threatening. Not demanding. Just determined. My guests can wait. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Nobody had ever spoken to me that way before. Not since I became Grace. Then another voice interrupted. Ethan. We both turned. A woman stood near the patio entrance. Elegant. Confident. Perfectly dressed. She looked to be in her early 30s. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly back. Her posture practically radiated privilege. Ethan's expression immediately hardened. Victoria. The woman glanced toward me briefly before returning her attention to him. The board members are asking for you. Ethan did not move. Victoria noticed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Is something wrong? No. His answer came too quickly. She smiled politely. The kind of smile that never quite reached the eyes. Good. Because tonight is important. Her gaze drifted toward me again. Longer this time. Assessing. Measuring. Almost recognizing. A strange feeling crawled across my skin. I had never met Victoria before. Yet something about her reaction felt familiar. Uncomfortable. As if she knew something she should not know. Finally, she turned and disappeared back into the crowd. Ethan watched her leave. The tension in his shoulders returned immediately. Stay away from her, he said quietly. I blinked. Why? His eyes met mine. Because if what I just learned is true, Victoria Whitmore may be the last person you should trust. The name hit me like a physical shock. Whitmore. A name I had spent years trying to forget. A name buried beneath false identities, sealed records, and painful memories. A name that belonged to Charlotte Whitmore, the girl I used to be. And standing beneath the gathering storm, I realized my past had finally found me. Some names never truly disappear. They wait, hidden beneath years of silence until someone speaks them out loud. Charlotte Whitmore. Hearing it again felt like stepping into a memory I had spent years trying to escape. The fundraiser continued around us, completely unaware that my world had just tilted beneath my feet. Ethan seemed to realize what his words had done. His expression softened immediately. Grace. I shook my head. Do not. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Please. For a moment, neither of us moved. The wind carried distant music from the gardens. Laughter drifted through the night air. It all sounded impossibly far away. Ethan glanced toward the crowd before lowering his voice. We cannot talk about this here. He was right. Yet that did not make it easier. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. To walk through the gates and disappear before more questions could follow. It was the strategy that had kept me safe for years. Run first. Explain later. But something stopped me. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the growing realization that Ethan had already uncovered pieces of the truth I thought were buried forever. How much do you know? I finally asked. Ethan released a slow breath. Not enough. The answer surprised me. Honest. Direct. The investigator found inconsistencies. Records that appeared 3 years ago. Missing information before that. Then tonight another report arrived. He paused. Your name surfaced alongside the Whitmore family. My stomach tightened. The Whitmores had once been one of the most respected families in the Northeast. Old money. Old influence. The kind of family whose name appeared on buildings, charities, and university libraries. Then everything changed. After that, people stopped asking questions. At least publicly. You should forget what you found, I said quietly. Ethan actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the suggestion was impossible. I spent a year looking for the woman who saved my life. His eyes locked onto mine. Now I discover she may be connected to a mystery nobody has been able to explain for decades. Forgetting is no longer an option. The words settled heavily between us. Before I could answer, movement near the terrace caught my attention. Victoria Whitmore stood beneath the lights speaking with several board members. Elegant. Confident. Untouchable. Yet something about her behavior felt different now. Every few minutes, she glanced in our direction. Watching. Calculating. Ethan noticed too. She does not know what I discovered. Are you sure? I asked. His expression darkened slightly. No. That honesty frightened me more than certainty would have. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the estate. Rain began falling moments later. Guests hurried beneath covered tents while staff rushed to protect decorations and equipment. Within minutes, the celebration shifted indoors. The mansion filled with the sound of hundreds of conversations. In the confusion, Ethan stepped closer. There is something else. My pulse quickened immediately. What? His jaw tightened. The investigator could not find any evidence that Charlotte Whitmore died. The world seemed to stop. Rain tapped against the windows. Glasses clinked somewhere behind us. Yet all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Ethan continued carefully. Which means someone wanted the world to believe she disappeared. He studied my face. And people usually hide someone for a reason. I looked away before he could read the answer in my eyes. Because he was finally asking the right questions. And the truth waiting behind them was far bigger than either of us realized. The past is patient. It does not knock on the door. It waits until you are comfortable, then walks straight through the walls you spent years building. I barely slept that night. Rain continued long after the fundraiser ended, tapping softly against my window like fingers searching for attention. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the same words again. Charlotte Whitmore. By sunrise, exhaustion sat heavy in my chest. The estate looked different in the morning. Quieter. Almost innocent. Guests had departed. Decorations were being removed. Staff moved through hallways collecting evidence of a celebration that already felt distant. I tried to lose myself in work. Dusting shelves. Organizing storage rooms. Anything to keep my mind occupied. It did not work. Around 10 o'clock, Mrs. Caldwell informed me that Ethan wanted to see me in the library. My stomach tightened immediately. The walk there felt longer than usual. When I entered, Ethan stood beside the fireplace holding a thick folder. He looked as though he had not slept either. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. The folder alone told me this conversation would not be simple. You came. His voice sounded softer than normal. You asked. Ethan nodded toward a chair. Please sit. I remained standing. He seemed to understand. Slowly, he opened the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, legal documents, and family records. Pieces of a life I thought had vanished. My life. The Whitmore family reported their youngest daughter missing 20 years ago, he said carefully. The investigation never reached a conclusion. My throat tightened. Ethan continued. The public believed she was gone forever. He looked up. But several records do not make sense. I stared at the documents. One photograph showed a smiling family standing in front of a large Connecticut estate. I recognized every face immediately. My father. My mother. Me. A lifetime ago. Someone spent years removing information, Ethan said. School records disappeared. Medical records vanished. Financial documents were altered. His expression darkened. That takes money. Influence. Planning. The room felt smaller with every word. Why are you showing me this? I asked quietly. Ethan closed the folder. Because I think someone wanted Charlotte Whitmore erased. Silence settled between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. For years I had convinced myself that staying hidden was enough. That surviving meant never looking back. Now Ethan was proving how wrong I had been. A knock interrupted the conversation. The library door opened. Victoria entered without waiting for permission. She stopped when she saw me. For a fraction of a second, surprise crossed her face. Then it disappeared beneath a perfect smile. I hope I am not interrupting. Ethan's expression immediately hardened. Actually, you are. Victoria ignored the remark and approached the desk. Her eyes drifted toward the folder. Recognition flashed there. Brief. Dangerous. Interesting reading material, she said. My pulse quickened. Ethan noticed too. What do you know about the Whitmores? He asked suddenly. Victoria's smile never changed. Only what everyone knows. A lie. I felt it instantly. So did Ethan. The tension in the room sharpened. Victoria glanced toward me again. This time her gaze lingered. Cold. Assessing. Almost hostile. Then she smiled. Be careful, Ethan. Her voice sounded pleasant enough. Some mysteries are better left in the past. She turned and walked away. The door closed behind her. Silence followed. Ethan slowly looked toward me. I realized we were both thinking the same thing. Victoria knew far more than she admitted. And for the first time in years, I began to suspect that my disappearance had never been a mystery at all. It had been a plan. The most dangerous moment is not when a secret is discovered. It is when the people protecting that secret realize someone has started asking questions. After Victoria left the library, neither Ethan nor I spoke for several seconds. The silence felt heavier than any conversation. He closed the folder and walked toward the window overlooking the gardens. Workers were dismantling the last of the fundraiser decorations. White tints disappeared piece by piece. By sunset, it would be as if the event had never happened. I envied that. Some things could be packed away and forgotten. My past was not one of them. You recognized her reaction, Ethan said quietly without turning around. It was not a question. I hesitated. Maybe. He finally looked back at me. Grace. The name sounded different now. Careful. Almost protective. Whatever happened 20 years ago is still affecting people today. His eyes searched mine. Including you. I wanted to deny it. Instead, I sat down slowly and stared at the folder. Victoria is my cousin. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Ethan remained perfectly still. I thought so. I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because after years of hiding, the truth felt strangely simple. She was always older. Smarter. Everyone listened to her. Memories surfaced without permission. Summer afternoons. Family gatherings. Large houses filled with important people discussing business while children played in gardens. A lifetime that belonged to someone else now. What happened? Ethan asked. I looked down at my hands. I do not know everything. That part was true. But one day my parents became frightened. My voice dropped lower. Meetings started happening behind closed doors. Arguments. Lawyers. Then suddenly people I trusted told me I had to leave. Ethan listened without interrupting. Leave where? Anywhere. I swallowed hard. The goal was to disappear. The room fell silent again. Ethan moved closer and sat across from me. For the first time since we met, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man trying to understand someone he cared about. The realization unsettled me. Did your parents send you away? He asked. I nodded. They said it was temporary. My throat tightened. They promised they would come back for me. Ethan's expression changed immediately. He already knew the answer before asking the next question. Did they? I looked away. Outside, sunlight reflected across the estate fountain. Everything appeared peaceful. No. The word barely escaped. Ethan said nothing. Somehow that made it easier. No pity. No dramatic reaction. Just quiet understanding. A knock suddenly interrupted us. Mrs. Caldwell appeared in the doorway looking unusually nervous. Mr. Sterling. Ethan stood immediately. What is it? She glanced toward me before speaking. There is someone at the gate asking for Miss Parker. My stomach dropped. Nobody came looking for Grace Parker. Nobody. Ethan noticed my reaction instantly. Who? Mrs. Caldwell hesitated. He would only give one name. The pause seemed endless. Then she spoke the word that made every color drain from my world. Whitmore. Ethan and I exchanged a look. Neither of us moved. Because deep down we both understood the same thing. The past was no longer waiting in the shadows. It had arrived at the front gate. There are moments when life gives you a choice. Run from the truth one more time, or finally turn around and face it. My legs felt weak as Ethan and I followed Mrs. Caldwell through the mansion. Every step toward the front gate felt heavier than the last. By the time we reached the security office, my heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. A monitor displayed the entrance camera feed. A man stood outside the gates holding an umbrella against the gray afternoon sky. He looked to be in his late 60s. Tall, thin, dressed in an expensive dark coat. The moment I saw his face, 20 years of memories crashed into me. I know him, I whispered. Ethan looked at me immediately. Who is he? I could not answer right away. The man on the screen had once attended nearly every family gathering. He had sat at holiday dinners. He had laughed with my parents. He had known me when I was still Charlotte. His name is Arthur Bennett, I finally said. He worked for my father. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Past tense. I nodded. As far as I knew. Arthur looked older now. Time had carved lines into his face. Yet there was something familiar in the way he stood. Patient. Calm. Waiting. Not like a threat. More like someone carrying a burden for too long. Ethan folded his arms. Do you want to see him? The question should have been simple. Instead, it felt impossible. Part of me wanted to leave immediately. Another part desperately needed answers. Before I could decide, the security phone rang. The guard answered, listened, then looked toward us. He says he has a message for Miss Whitmore. Every muscle in my body froze. Not Grace. Not Parker. Whitmore. The name echoed through the room. Ethan's expression darkened. What message? The guard listened again, then repeated the words. He says your parents did not abandon you. The world stopped. I stared at the monitor. Arthur remained standing beyond the gates, waiting silently beneath the umbrella. My parents did not abandon me. For 20 years I had carried that wound. Every birthday, every Christmas, every lonely apartment and borrowed identity. I had believed they left me behind. Suddenly, Ethan stepped forward. Open the gate. The guard hesitated. Sir, open it. Minutes later, Arthur Bennett entered the estate. Rain dripped from the edge of his umbrella as he approached. When he saw me, emotion flickered across his face. Relief, sadness, guilt, perhaps all three. Charlotte. My throat tightened immediately. Nobody had spoken my real name with that kind of familiarity in decades. Arthur removed a sealed envelope from inside his coat. His hands trembled slightly. I have been looking for you for a very long time. I stared at the envelope. Yellowed with age. My name written across the front in handwriting I recognized instantly. My mother's handwriting. Tears blurred my vision before I even touched it. Arthur swallowed hard. Your mother gave this to me the night you disappeared. The rain seemed to fade into the background. So did the mansion. So did everything except the envelope resting between us. Because deep down I already knew one thing. Whatever was written inside those pages was about to change everything I believed about my past. The letter felt heavier than paper should have. My hands trembled as I carried it into the library. Outside, the rain continued falling over the estate, turning the windows into sheets of silver. Arthur remained near the doorway while Ethan stood a respectful distance away. Neither of them spoke. They understood this moment belonged to me. Slowly, I broke the seal. The paper inside had yellowed with age. My mother's handwriting appeared immediately. Elegant. Familiar. Painfully familiar. Charlotte, if you are reading this, then it means I was right to trust Arthur. It also means I was not able to come back for you myself. Tears blurred the words before I reached the second sentence. I swallowed hard and continued reading. Please believe one thing above all else. Your father and I never abandoned you. Every choice we made was to protect you. I pressed a hand against my mouth. 20 years of anger began cracking apart inside me. The letter explained things I had never known. My parents had discovered irregularities involving family trusts, property transfers, and legal documents connected to the Whitmore estate. People they once trusted had become determined to gain control of assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. When concerns were raised, strange things began happening. Meetings, pressure, threats disguised as advice. Then came the decision to send me away under a new identity until everything could be resolved. We thought it would only be for a short time, my mother wrote. We believed the truth would come out quickly. We believed we would bring you home. The next line made my heart stop. We were wrong. I lowered the letter and stared at the fireplace. My entire life had been built on the belief that nobody came back for me. Yet every word on those pages told a different story. Arthur finally spoke. Your parents spent years trying to reverse what happened. His voice was heavy with regret. But every path they followed seemed to close. Ethan stepped forward. What happened to them? Arthur looked down. They never stopped searching for a way to bring Charlotte home safely. The answer was careful, deliberately incomplete. I noticed immediately. Ethan noticed too. That is not the full story, he said quietly. Arthur's shoulders sagged. For a moment, he looked 20 years older. Then he reached into his briefcase and removed another document. This one was recent. Very recent. He placed it on the table. I stared at the heading. Whitmore Family Trust Amendment. My pulse quickened. Ethan picked it up first. As he scanned the page, disbelief spread across his face. This cannot be right. I looked at him. What is it? He slowly turned the document toward me. My eyes landed on a single paragraph. Beneficiary designation. Primary heir. Charlotte Whitmore. The room spun. No, I whispered. Arthur nodded sadly. Yes. Ethan looked between us. If this is authentic, then Charlotte Whitmore is the legal heir to one of the largest private estates in the country. Silence crashed over the room. Suddenly everything made sense. The missing records. The lies. The pressure. The secrets. Somebody had not wanted Charlotte Whitmore found because Charlotte Whitmore was supposed to inherit everything. And somewhere inside the mansion, Victoria Whitmore already knew it. Money changes people. That is what everyone says. Sitting in the library with documents spread across the table, I realized something far worse. The promise of money changes people long before they ever receive it. The rain had finally stopped outside. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Ethan remained silent as I stared at the trust documents. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Estates. Investments. Holdings spread across multiple states. None of it felt real. None of it felt like mine. I had spent years counting grocery receipts and worrying about rent payments. The idea that my name could be attached to such wealth felt absurd. Arthur watched me carefully. Charlotte. I flinched at the name again. You need to understand something. His voice softened. This was never about money alone. I looked up. Arthur nodded toward the documents. The inheritance represented control, influence, legacy. Whoever controlled the trust controlled the future of the Whitmore family. Ethan leaned back in his chair, which explains why someone worked so hard to keep Charlotte hidden. Arthur's expression darkened. Exactly. Silence settled over the room. My gaze drifted toward the window. For years I had built a simple life. It was not glamorous. It was not powerful, but it belonged to me. Grace Parker had earned every dollar she possessed, every opportunity, every mistake. Suddenly that life felt fragile, temporary, like a photograph beginning to fade. I do not want any of this, I whispered. Both men looked at me. I never asked for it. The words came easier now. I never wanted family battles, or lawyers, or trust funds. My throat tightened. I just wanted answers. Ethan's eyes softened immediately. Then focus on the answers. I laughed quietly. Easy for you to say. Actually, he replied, it is not. For a moment, the billionaire disappeared. In his place sat the man from the highway. The man who had looked at me through rain and confusion a year earlier. The truth rarely arrives the way we hope, he said. But avoiding it never makes it disappear. His words stayed with me long after he finished speaking. That evening I packed a small suitcase. Not because anyone asked me to leave. Because staying suddenly felt impossible. Every hallway of the mansion now carried questions. Every conversation felt heavier. Every glance from staff members seemed different. News traveled quickly in places built on secrets. As I zipped the suitcase closed, a knock sounded at my door. Ethan stood outside. Neither of us spoke immediately. The hallway was quiet. Golden evening light spilled through the windows behind him. You are leaving. Again, not a question. I nodded. For a few days. Ethan studied me carefully. Running away? I almost smiled. Maybe. He looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. Grace. The name sounded deliberate. Chosen. Or Charlotte. Whichever you prefer. My chest tightened. I do not even know anymore. Something changed in his expression then. Not pity. Not concern. Understanding. You do not have to figure it out tonight. For several seconds neither of us moved. Then Ethan handed me a small envelope. What is this? I asked. Something my investigator found this morning. My pulse quickened immediately. More documents. Ethan shook his head slowly. No. His voice lowered. A photograph. I stared at the envelope, suddenly afraid to open it. Ethan stepped back. Call me after you see it. Then he walked away. Alone in my room, I opened the envelope with trembling hands. A single photograph slid into my lap. The image was 20 years old. A family gathering. Children playing beneath summer sunlight. Adults smiling in the background. At first I only saw myself. Then my breath caught. Standing beside me was Victoria Whitmore. And directly behind us stood a man whose face I recognized immediately from the fundraiser. One of the men who had been secretly discussing documents and hidden information near the fountain. Which meant the mystery surrounding my disappearance had not begun 20 years ago. It had been continuing the entire time. Sometimes the answer you spend years searching for is standing right in front of you, waiting for you to stop looking backward long enough to see it. I spent the entire night staring at the photograph. The man standing behind Victoria and me had attended Ethan's fundraiser only days earlier. 20 years had added gray hair and wrinkles, but the face was unmistakable. By sunrise, I was back at the Sterling estate. Ethan met me in the library without a word. I handed him the photograph. His expression changed immediately. I know him. My pulse quickened. Who is he? Ethan placed the photograph beside several files already spread across the desk. His name is Richard Calloway. He sits on the advisory board connected to several Whitmore assets. Silence filled the room. Suddenly, every scattered piece began forming a picture. The secret conversations near the fountain. The missing records. The pressure surrounding the trust. The the same names appearing across decades. Ethan exhaled slowly. Charlotte, this was never about making someone disappear. I looked at him. Then what was it about? His answer came quietly. Control. The words settled heavily between us. Later that afternoon, Arthur arrived with additional records. Together, the documents revealed what nobody had fully understood before. Certain individuals had benefited enormously from Charlotte Whitmore remaining lost to history. As long as she stayed hidden, nobody questioned where authority rested. Nobody challenged existing arrangements. Nobody reopened old decisions. Yet now everything had changed. Because Charlotte Whitmore was no longer missing. She was standing in the middle of the story. The following week became a blur of meetings, lawyers, and conversations I never imagined having. For the first time, people listened when I spoke. Not because of money. Not because of a family name. Because the truth had finally surfaced. Victoria eventually requested a private meeting. We sat across from each other in a quiet conference room overlooking downtown Manhattan. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. I was angry, she admitted. For years. I studied her carefully. At me? She nodded. At what your return would change. Her honesty caught me off guard. And now? Victoria looked out the window. Now I think we both lost more years than we should have. It was not a perfect reconciliation. Life rarely offers those. But it was a beginning. Sometimes that is enough. A month later, I stood in the gardens of the Sterling estate watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and amber. The world felt different. Not because of inheritances or headlines. Because for the first time in 20 years, I no longer had to pretend to be someone else. Footsteps approached behind me. Ethan. Somehow I always knew when it was him. You look peaceful, he said. I smiled. I think I finally am. We stood together beneath the evening sky. No secrets. No investigations. No questions demanding answers. Just quiet. Ethan looked toward the horizon before speaking. You know, if you had kept driving that night on the highway, none of this would have happened. I laughed softly. I have thought about that too. His eyes met mine. Warm. Certain. I am glad you stopped. So was I? Because I finally understood something my mother tried to tell me years ago. The people meant for your life do not always arrive when things are easy. Sometimes they appear in storms. Sometimes they help you find your way home. And sometimes, after years of hiding from the truth, they remind you who you were all along.